Skynet not only needed infiltrators to beat the resistance, it also needed heavy firepower on a highly mobile platform. To meet these demands, it created the T-47, a colossal hunter-killer that would become a PTSD-inducing sight for the resistance soldiers. The T-47 was a massive bipedal walking tank. It stood around 30 feet tall and was around 10 feet wide, making it a fearsome sight. Some joke that it was just a big robotic chicken. That's until they fought one themselves and would see its fighting prowess. Even with its large size, it was highly mobile. It could squat low with its legs to move under low bridges, and even shuffle through large tunnels that were originally designed for vehicles. This immense size also gave it a powerful psychological effect, with resistance forces increasingly calling it a giant T-800, and fear began to grow of even bigger versions being deployed. It gained a mythological type of aura to it, and until the resistance began to destroy them in large numbers, it severely hampered their morale. The T-47 had a fairly slow speed, around 10 miles per hour, but it did have a trick up its sleeve. It could jump its own height, at around 30 feet. This meant it could leap onto high terrain and clear large ditches and storm drains. This was a shock to many when they were being pursued by the T-47, as it would leap over barricades and ruins to land down upon its prey and begin to rate them with firepower. These powerful legs could also be used to crush humans with ease, and even kick light vehicles into a rolling mess. This would twist them into nothing more than a wreck, and any unfortunate occupants would be dead before the wreck came to a standstill. And it may not have been the fastest of Skynet's vehicles, but this constant 10-mile-an-hour pace could be maintained over all terrain types. Combining this with its leaping abilities, it was even able to climb up steep slopes and bypass obstacles that would stop such beasts as the HK tank. This gave the T-47 a tactical flexibility that Skynet would make full use of. And the fact that it was on legs, not tracks or wheels, allowed it to turn on a dime. This was especially useful in urban environments where resistance forces would launch ambushes, and if they didn't knock out the T-47 almost immediately, they would quickly find the weapon systems turned towards them, something that made it a very risky endeavour to fight this monster. With this mobility came heavy firepower. The T-47 was armed with a multitude of weapons. It had 2 mounted rocket launchers for dealing with any armoured vehicles that could be loaded with everything from anti-tank, high explosives, and even plasma warheads, making them very flexible in battlefield use. These were accompanied by either dual arm-mounted Gatling cannons or plasma cannons. The Gatling cannons were 50 caliber and could unleash a hail of rapid-fire death. Normally armour-piercing rounds were used, but high explosives could be used if the situation required, and the intense rate of fire made them ideal for shredding infantry or light vehicles, also suppressing positions while other Terminators moved in to corner and kill the targets. The plasma cannon variants had a lower rate of fire than the Gatling cannons, but made up for it in pure firepower, as the plasma shots could annihilate any target. Even heavy armour would be overwhelmed with the sheer brute force, as the heaviest armour would be melted into slag, and the poor crew would boil into nothing more than vapour. The fact that these weapons were arm-mounted gave it some huge advantages. Both arms had independent movement so could shoot at separate targets, and they were able to traverse horizontally and vertically pretty well, which allowed it to engage everything from infantry cowering in the ruins to resistance helicopters that would be swatted away like flies under a fusillade of firepower. The T-47's size allowed it to have space for ammunition hoppers for the Gatling cannons and extra plasma storage for its plasma cannons. This meant it could shoot thousands of shots for each weapon configuration, combined with the rocket launchers, which had 8 warheads. So as you can tell, the T-47 was more than capable of laying waste to a company-sized resistance force before needing to reload its weapons. The ammunition feeds for the Gatling cannons were exposed and vulnerable to being shot and severed with the rounds even cooking off. This would result in the Gatling cannons running dry and in some cases having ammunition jams or malfunctions causing the weapons to need repairs. It could be possible for Skynet in future to arm the T-47 with all sorts of exotic weapons. I would not be surprised if we saw a flame variant designed to purge humanity from the ruins while we hide amongst them, or even retrofitted with long-range rockets for bombarding resistance positions. The T-47 could not only dish out the punches but also take them. Being that it was first encountered in the same year as the T-800, it made sense that it was made out of very similar, hyper-alloy metals. Now this combined with its size allowed for very thick armour which covered its entire structure, with very few small weak points, though it did have some exposed wires below the torso area, which were a major target for resistant sharpshooters, and its head, which is where the main sensor package was housed, was an obvious target but still had thick armour, and its optics were made of reinforced ballistic glass, and the entire head module had concussive resistant material lining it to reduce concussive damage to the vital sensors. Small arms would do nothing against the T-47. Even heavy conventional weapons had a tough time, with 30mm autocannons and above being what was needed to effectively neutralise one. For guerrilla forces that lacked heavy weapons, their options to fight the T-47 were to use man-portable anti-tank weapons that could penetrate its armour, or powerful high-explosive charges that could blow out its legs to immobilise it. Plasma weapons were an option, but unless they were of the heavier variety, the T-47 could shrug off large amounts of lighter plasma fire. Resistance forces realised fairly quickly that laying powerful magnetic minefields was their best chance to defeat the T-47. They simply had to lure them into it, and if they put these minefields in areas where the T-47 would have to leap to get into them, this would lead to a combination of a powerful explosion with the full force of the T-47 landing on it, resulting in the machine being absolutely demolished. A broken mess, with its over-eagerness to pursue being its downfall. The use of hyperalloys allowed Skynet to keep the T-47's weight down. No exact figure on what it weighed, but it was light enough to leap in the air very well and to move with ease. And with Skynet's powerful HK aerial, I think it's possible that the T-47 could have been airlifted and deployed straight from a HK aerial to the battlefield. I'll also add, due to its tall height, it was probably possible for a specially adapted type of HK aerial to rearm the T-47 wherever it was, allowing for quick and tactically smart resupply. This meant the T-47 could continue its combat operations without lengthy returns to Skynet bases. The T-47 sensors were very potent, with it having a focus on optics and visual scanners. These optics were front-mounted on the T-47's head module. They had the usual night vision and thermal optics with long-range magnification so it could engage targets miles away, and also give accurate coordinates to artillery and air support for pinpoint accuracy. The visual sensors could predict projectile trajectories, analyse what types of vehicles and weapons the enemy was using, and it could also identify the most dangerous target to focus fire on. It even had a sweeper scanning mode to comb through terrain, such as dense forests or ruins, to look for signs of life that might be trying to evade it. The visual data could be fed and entwined with other machines to give a superior battlefield assessment and allow for effective target engagement. This allowed for Skynet to deploy smaller, more effective hunter-killer forces, and if high-priority targets were located, instant fire support would rain down on them to stop them from escaping. Its audio sensors were good, giving it good awareness of sound in all directions, being able to differentiate various sounds at once to help it locate targets. But it tended to rely heavily on its optics, giving resistance troops a bit of an advantage when sneaking around it out of its lines of sight. To power this Colossus, it was fitted with a plasma fusion reactor that could keep it running for weeks or months continuously, depending on how much energy it needed to expend. This could vary wildly, with some T-47s being on patrol duties, on or behind the annihilation line, seeing very little combat, whereas units deployed to frontline assaults and incursions into resistance-occupied territory would be fighting non-stop. With all this power and firepower, the T-47 generated significant heat. This was either vented or put into heat sinks to avoid a build-up and a catastrophic meltdown. The T-47 did possess an emergency shutdown mode that could be triggered to guard against heat and physical damage. It would make it vulnerable for a short period of time, but after a reboot it would be able to either eliminate the threat or flee to get repairs. Normally it would fight to the death, lacking much of a self-preservation protocol. Intelligence-wise, the T-47's braid was far more simple than that of the T-800. It was a combat-orientated intelligence focusing on finding and killing the enemy, even if it caused significant damage or destruction to the T-47. This actually led to the T-47 not being the best at guarding installations, as it was more focused on offensive operations, and Skynet seemed to make its intelligence far more aggressive than most, a true predator always hunting for the next kill. When it came to production, it was a pretty simple design for Skynet, as it did not have to miniaturize its components. The T-47 had ample space for everything that was needed, and this allowed for Skynet to focus on simplicity and robustness in its design. No need to worry about infiltration like smaller machines, and this massively streamlined the creation of it. And with it being encountered very often by the resistance fighters on all fronts of the future war, it's safe to say that Skynet made them in the thousands. It became one of Skynet's go-to heavy support hunter-killers, and the fact that it could handle almost any terrain meant that resistance forces encountered it even in mountainous areas where they only expected Skynet's smaller machines. This actually led to resistance fighters having to carry more man-portable anti-tank weapons even if they expected no enemy heavy armour. In terms of supplies and logistics, the T-47 would need access to repair and rearmament facilities to be at maximum efficiency. This does limit its deployment deep into hostile territory, and it's best kept on the front lines where it can be supported and fight the resistance as much as possible. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video on the T-47. There wasn't much info to go on, so I obviously had to use what was available, and then fill in the gaps with obviously Terminator knowledge and kind of some Terminator common sense. But I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, you guys have a beautiful evening.